Part 2, Episode 11, The First Days of Middle School. Middle school was more than just a new set of textbooks or moving up to the next grade for me. It was the first time I truly felt like I was stepping outside of my small, familiar world. I began learning new subjects, physics, chemistry, biology, topics that sounded strange and overwhelming at first. The classroom was bigger, filled with so many more students. Teachers no longer remembered every single name the way my old teacher once did. I realized that to survive here, I needed to take charge of my own journey. I didn't have many close friends. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was always hesitant to speak up. My classmates seemed so quick to connect, so much more confident than I was. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet, going to class, returning home, studying, and helping my mother with chores whenever I could. My family was still poor. The small tin-roofed home my mother had built on my aunt's land was still where the three of us lived. At night, under the faint yellow light of a flickering bulb, I would sit at a low table doing my homework while my mother quietly sewed beside me. The wind rattled noisily against the old metal roof, but in my heart I felt a strange sense of peace. There were days when I fell ill, mild fevers, exhaustion, but I still pushed myself to go to school because I was afraid of falling behind, of being left out. I once dreamed of having a bicycle so I wouldn't have to walk so far each day, but that dream remained out of reach for a long time. Back then, I walked or got rides from classmates whenever possible. I still remember those red dirt roads, the scorching noontime heat, the sudden downpours. All of those memories are etched into my mind. I began to teach myself how to study. I borrowed used textbooks from older students to review lessons. I saved every blank sheet of paper, made the most of notebooks that weren't yet filled, anything to ease my mother's burdens, even just a little. I also started to understand more about the quiet sacrifices my mother made. Every morning, she woke up early, prepared our meals, and went off to do whatever work she could find. In the evenings, she came home, checking on me and my sister's schoolwork, making sure we had food to eat and a place to sleep. One night, I overheard her crying softly in the kitchen when she thought I had fallen asleep. Her voice was choked with emotion as she spoke to my sister. "As long as they can study and grow up to be good people, I'll endure whatever it takes." Those words engraved themselves into my heart, and from that moment on, I quietly promised myself that I would never give up. Those first years of middle school were difficult, but they shaped me. From a timid child, I slowly learned to stand on my own, to keep trying, and to nurture a dream deep in my heart that one day I would change my life and give my mother the peace and rest she deserved. Part 2, Episode 12, The Unforgettable Years. As the days passed, I slowly got used to the new school. I wasn't fully integrated, but I began to observe, listen, and accept the differences around me. I realized that no matter the situation, if I kept trying, I could always find my own path. Studying remained my top priority. I wasn't the best student, but I tried my hardest. There were nights I studied under a flickering light because the electricity was too weak, or days when my books were soaked from walking home in the rain. But never once did I think about giving up. One blessing I always had was my mother's quiet support. She never gave grand speeches, just warm meals, rides to school on her old bicycle, and that look in her eyes as I walked into class. That silent strength became my greatest motivation. Life didn't get any easier. Every time school fees were due, my mother had to scramble. I still remember the day she handed me a small amount of money and said softly, "Here for tomorrow's tuition." I took it, my chest tight, knowing it was likely all she had at the time. Sometimes I helped by herding the cow, cutting grass, or collecting scrap with my sister. I never felt ashamed. In fact, I was proud that I was growing up in a life where every small step was hard-earned and meaningful. I made a few good friends, kids who, like me, came from struggling families. We had no phones, no fancy toys, but we created a childhood full of memories. Playing football with dried pomelo rinds, telling ghost stories under the night sky, or climbing hills to pick wild berries. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I believed that as long as I kept going, good and heck, one day the future would smile upon me. Those middle school years were hard, but they planted in me a quiet belief that no matter where you begin, if you never give up, you can still reach the life you dream of. Part 2, Episode 13, The Night We Got Lost in the Forest. I was only 12 years old that year. One seemingly harmless afternoon, I and two of my friends, one boy, one girl, decided to go into the forest to catch wild bees. We all came from poor families. Growing up, surrounded by fields and forests, wandering around felt normal to us. I even brought along my little dog, clever and loyal. It followed me everywhere like a real friend. At first, we laughed and joked as we wandered down small trails through the trees, searching for beehives. But as the sun began to fade and the forest darkened, we realized something terrifying. We were lost. We couldn't recognize the way we came anymore. Every path looked the same, with thick trees and confusing forks. We tried to find our way back, walking in circles, but it only made us more confused. Then a light drizzle began to fall, and the cold settled in. With no other choice, we found a large tree and huddled beneath it to spend the night. That night became one of the most unforgettable nights of my childhood. The cold pierced through our wet clothes. We were soaked, hungry, and exhausted. No one had the energy to joke or speak anymore. One of us cried from fear. Another stayed completely silent, too tired to say anything. I just held on to my dog, and the three of us clung to each other, wishing for the night to end quickly. But the nightmare wasn't over. We soon discovered blood-sucking leeches all over our bodies, on our legs, arms, even our necks. Every bite left a trail of blood and pain. We panicked. But since we couldn't see the leeches on ourselves, we had to help each other pull them off. Some clung tight, buried deep into the skin. Using small twigs, we tried to poke and pry them away, scared, hurting, but too afraid to cry out loud. Little by little, we helped each other remove them, then curled up again, trembling from the cold and fear. Meanwhile, back in the village, our families were in chaos. My mother and the mothers of my two friends were crying so hard they couldn't speak. The villagers spread out with flashlights, shouting our names into the night, but the forest was wide and the rain kept falling. No one knew where we were. When morning finally came, we stood up in silence and continued walking. None of us spoke. We just walked toward any glimpse of light we could find, hoping it would lead us out. After what felt like forever, we saw something in the distance, green rice fields and rooftops. But it wasn't home. It was a completely unfamiliar place. Thankfully, one of my friends had relatives living in that area. They recognized us immediately, three filthy, exhausted kids and a little dog, and knew we were lost. They called our families, and our parents came to pick us up. That feeling, being found, it was like returning from the dead. We were starving, weak, bruised, covered in cuts and bites, but we were alive. That moment, those emotions, we would never forget. That night in the forest became a turning point in my memory. It was filled with fear, tears, and the strength of friendship. It was the first time I truly understood survival, love, and how precious life really is. Part 2, Episode 14, The Days After the Storm. After getting lost in the forest, the three of us became closer than ever, like family. We weren't just childhood friends anymore. We had gone through something unforgettable, something that changed us. I started to change too. I wasn't just a boy who only knew how to play and wander around. I began to help my mother more, not because I was told to, but because I wanted to. I realized I had to grow up, to be stronger, not only for myself, but for my mother and my older sister. Still, my childhood was filled with so many unforgettable memories. Some were silly, some were scary, and some, looking back now, were deeply touching. I remember the days when I didn't have school, and I would take our cow, our most valuable possession, given to us by the government to support poor families, out to graze in the fields. But to me, it was never just about looking after a cow. It was freedom. It was a chance to run, to play, to explore the streams and bushes, to catch fish, pick wild fruits, or simply to laugh with my friends. There was one time I got too caught up playing and completely lost sight of the cow. By the time I noticed, the sky was already turning dark. Panicked, I ran in all directions, calling out, crying as I searched. I was terrified, not just because I thought I'd get in trouble, but because I felt truly helpless in that vast open field. Thankfully, after a while, I spotted it calmly munching grass near a stream, as if it had never wandered off. Looking back now, those moments were priceless. I also remember slipping in the rice paddies, getting covered in mud, getting bitten by leeches, or coming home with torn clothes and a wide grin on my face. Life back then was full of hardships, but my memories are whole and rich. Those were the years when just a paper kite, a sunny afternoon, and a good friend could make me happy for days. Only later, when I grew up, did I understand those simple moments nourished my soul. They were my roots, my beginning, and the reason I can never forget where I came from. Part 2, Episode 15. Steps not only on the ground, but also within my soul. I began to realize that I wasn't just growing physically, I was growing in thought. There were days when I sat quietly, watching the rice fields, no longer filled with the excitement to run and play like before. I started to ask myself, why is my family poor? Why hasn't my father returned? How can I change my fate? I couldn't find the answers, but I began to remember every story adults told, listened closely to every bit of news on the radio or TV, and secretly read old books others had left behind. In those pages, I saw another world, broader, full of hope, yet filled with challenges. I felt small, but not insignificant. One day during the end-of-year class meeting, our teacher said something that I still remember. You can't choose where you're born, but you can choose the path you take. I froze. That one sentence felt like a beam of light breaking through the dark sky of my childhood. That night, I secretly wrote a promise in my school notebook. One day, I won't let my mother suffer anymore. I'll study hard. I'll go far. I'll share my story so no one has to feel ashamed of being poor. From that day on, I studied more seriously. Not just to pass exams, but to break free from the chains of my circumstances. I studied under the dim flicker of an oil lamp with the sound of mother coughing from exhaustion and the croaking of frogs echoing through the night. I didn't know how far I could go, but I knew one thing. I would not stop here.